interesting.
We have two guests with us this afternoon to help us decipher all of this. Thomas Glasgow, former Assistant State's Attorney, and Teresa Zagnoli, a jury expert. Let's go to Thomas Glasgow for a second here, former Assistant State's Attorney in Cook County. You've heard a lot of speculation that it could be a split verdict. What do you think?
You know what? As many juries that I've done, I've given up prognosticating on what juries come back with. Juries can do all sorts of weird things. I mean, it could be all guilty, it could be all not guilty, it could be a split verdict. You know, once they get back there, they go into this decision-making process, and as I've seen in the past, you have trials and then you have retrials. You have trials and everybody says, well, the last jury did this and the last jury did that. Well, this is a completely different makeup of people. It's very much like you tell a joke to some of your friends and those friends think it's hilarious. And you go to a separate group of friends and you tell the same joke. It's not the same atmosphere. It's not the same people. It's not the same dynamic. And you get back there. That jury could very well come back with 18 guilties. They could come back with 18 not guilties. They could come back with the split. We don't know until those things are read. I wish I could end up predicting that, but I wouldn't be trying.
Which we will know probably within 10 minutes here.
Well, and Teresa, if we can talk about that too. People around the dinner table may say one thing about whether they think this governor is guilty or not guilty, but you say when a jury goes back into that jury room, things change.
Things change. They could be trash talking as much as anybody else when they're talking to their neighbor, and then all of a sudden they get that summons, they show up for jury duty, and once they get chosen and sworn in, they take their jobs very seriously. And I don't think jurors do crazy things. I think jurors give verdicts that reflect, they give back what they took in. And so usually it is a reflection of the information that they were given.
And obviously they took this very seriously because they have spent so much time day after day. A lot of people thought they might be deadlocked, but clearly they reached a decision and they went through the evidence to do it. Thomas Glasgow, for a second, let's help prepare the viewers for what we're going to find out when the verdict's read. There are 20 counts. They've reached verdicts on 18. The other two we won't hear about today, at least not as the judge announces the verdict. What can we expect? The first 10 counts have to do with wire fraud charges. What should we be looking for, and what should the audience at home be looking for as these verdicts begin to be read?
As they begin to come forth, the subject matter of each wire fraud is what's important, because that's really what's going to give you the tenor of what the jury was talking about and where they were going during the course of its deliberations. If you begin to see guilties on, say, you know, a wiretap that has to do with bribery, then you can expect a bribery conviction later on, and the conspiracy to commit bribery, etc. Those are the sort of things we can look for. But those wire fraud counts run the gamut of all his actions, because he ended up using a scheme or artifice to defraud.
The first count is the Children's Hospital alleged scheme there. Counts 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10 all have to do with the allegations of the sentencing.
Correct.
So if we see any guilty verdicts in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10, your assumption would be he's going to be found guilty on the attempted extortion charges involved with that sentencing.
I would think so. If they believe that, then they believe the other allegations that went on. Now, that being said, they could have been doing horse trading back in there and saying, look, we can't come to we're deadlocked on these two, but why don't we go ahead and agree to wire fraud, because it sounds to us as jurors that maybe that's a lesser charge. Maybe it's not as serious as the extortion or the bribery counts.
And as we learned in the last case, when they read the verdict, they went automatically to count 24, and we were all like, what about the other counts ahead of that? But they will go to the count that they agreed on, correct? The first count that they... So if they did agree on count 1 and they have a verdict on that count, we'll begin with count 1. But let's say they didn't agree on count 1, but they do agree on count 2. We'll hear about count 2.
Should go to count 2. And they'll read off the ones that they have verdicts for. And, you know, generally speaking, they follow the indictment. Generally speaking, they follow the charges. So that's what we should hear.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the jury makeup, Teresa. A lot of people have said, interestingly, the last jury split 6 men, 6 women. This one heavily female-dominated, 11 women, 1 man. What does that say to you as a jury consultant?
Well, those women are not going to come together as a coalition just because they're women, and so it's more likely that there was a split. Obviously, at least in 2 counts, that there was a split amongst the women. Because the guy on the jury didn't have anybody to pal up with. So it's not going to be a gender, it's not going to reflect gender as to how the decision came back.
Some of the columnists have commented that women have a tendency to discuss first, vote later. whereas men may take an initial vote of, hey, where are we at, and then start talking about the case. Do you find that to be true?
Women are social creatures, and so we all want to get along. And at the end of the day, we want everybody to like the verdict, as opposed to just do justice. And we're social leaders, as opposed to just the male version is to list off the things that need to be done. Here are the counts. All right, let's get started. And women want to know how we all felt. Did everybody have a good time? Is anybody uncomfortable? Check the air conditioning, check the coffee, check the food, and then go about our business.
Now, many of these are 20-count felonies with a potential sentence of up to 20 years in prison. Does the jury know that? They're not supposed to pay attention to it, but do they in all the research you've done over the years?
No, they don't know it. They do ponder as to what the outcome is going to be, but they don't spend a lot of time there. They're very focused on what the question is and what evidence do we have to support this question, because they know that once they walk out of that jury room today, they're going to face the media and their neighbors and their friends. And so they're going to rely very heavily on a piece or two of evidence that they in their head think that convinced them, and they're going to rely on the jury instructions.
And if I can, from inside the courtroom, we're getting a tweet now. Rod Blagojevich, his wife Patty, have arrived on the 25th floor of the Dirksen Federal Building. And when they did arrive on that 25th floor, apparently the hallway went silent. Now, you've been in that situation before, watching people walk in that you've prosecuted. What goes through your mind as a prosecutor at this final moment, right before you're going to find out which way the jury went?
As a prosecutor, you're relieved. You're also very apprehensive because, just as we just discussed, I don't know what the verdict is on that jury trial. Did they believe my witnesses? Did they disbelieve the defendant? Did they disbelieve the defendant when I cross-examined them? Would a reasonable person believe what just came out of that guy's mouth and his explanation of what went on? All those things are going through your head, and you're trying to think about, how is this going to play out? You're just as uncertain as the defense is, because juries come back different ways, always.
We do not have a camera in the courtroom because you cannot. We have people in the courtroom. Phil Rogers, Carol Marine, they are there. Mr. Glasgow, what is happening inside that courtroom right now? Will the jury walk in? Will everybody rise? Will the judge announce the verdict? Will a court deputy? How will it work?
Absolutely. What will happen is everyone will come in. The judge will then ask the jury to come in. The jury will come in. Everyone will rise for the jury. Everyone will be seated, and the judge will ask the foreman of the jury, have you selected a foreman? Yes. Will the foreman please announce whether or not you've reached a verdict? Yes, we have. Would you please tender it to the bailiff or to the marshal? The marshal would then take it to the court. The judge would review it and review what the verdicts were, and then have the verdicts read.
And these are things that no one knows other than the jury, because they took the vote and they know which way they went on each of the counts. But the judge doesn't know, the prosecutor's defense, no one knows what this verdict is.
No one knows. And when the verdict is announced, the only person other than the people sitting in the box is the judge, because the judge has that privilege of looking at the verdicts to make sure that they're all signed correctly, to make sure that no one has spoiled the verdict forms, and that they have to go back and redo something. So he's privy to that.
And does the jury foreman then will read the verdict for each count as it is read, correct? So we'll go one by one by one?
Or the court can.
Okay.
It depends on the judge, and it depends on how they do things in their particular courtroom.
Now, if any of these verdicts are guilty, many of them are 20-year felonies, as we mentioned.
Yes.
What happens in terms of the sentence? What do you think a likely sentence if he is convicted on one of these serious 20-year felony charges?
I think that most likely what's going to happen is he's going to get somewhere between the 7.5 to 10-year range. I think that's a really logical choice. We look back on Governor Ryan, who actually pocketed and he ended up getting money from this. I believe it was in the range of $250,000 that he got. He got roughly 6.5 years. This is a much more egregious case, not because he didn't get the money, but because he tampered with or tried to undermine the government and the faith of the people in the government and how it's run.
And we talked before, too, federal sentencing guidelines used to be set in stone. If it was 20 years, it was 20 years done. But now you're saying there is some leeway there.
There is some leeway. And the interesting thing about federal guidelines is that if he's convicted on one, let's say one of the 20 counts, the judge can use all the wrongdoing and all the other counts to then sentence him to whatever range he feels is appropriate. And he can take into consideration all the other bad acts and all the things that he was found not guilty on, and the fact that he testified and perhaps perjured himself or testified untruthfully, or all of those things can be taken into account. He still has one that he has to be sentenced on, and that's the line to the FBI, where he's facing up to 5 years on that.
From the first trial. Because that's what I was just going to say. Even if he is found not guilty today, though some are speculating mixed verdict,
correct,
he still has to face sentencing for that what she was convicted of in the first trial.
He's still facing 5 years, and based on the other 20 charges that we see today and the RICO charges that were dismissed, those are things that the judge can take into account in sentencing, and the prosecution will file a sentencing brief with those allegations and with those things of wrongdoing within the brief for the judge to consider.
All right, we're just a few minutes away from the verdict. Let's go back to Marianne Ahern at the Dirksen Federal Building with the latest there. Marianne?
Perhaps you also remember that last year it was his brother Robert Blagojevich who had been charged.
Your Days of Our Lives segment and catch up with that.
1:25 a.m. Dick Simpson, political science professor, head of the political science department at UIC. Thanks for being here. Former alderman. Politically, well, first of all, I mean, you've watched Rob Blagojevich for years. What's going through your mind as you know they have reached an agreement on 18 of these charges?
Well, I think the more important thing is what it means for the public. He's already been convicted of one charge. The assumption is he'll be convicted of some other charges today and be sentenced. I think that's important because this is about the 1,500th conviction of a public official since 1970 in Illinois. The cost of corruption in Chicago and Illinois is about $500 million a year at a minimum. It's one of the reasons our taxes and the rest are so incredible, and we're in such a deficit situation. I think it's important that we understand that this isn't going to be allowed to continue. The first Blagojevich conviction did cause changes. We got new legislation. I think it may, if this is indeed a conviction, that it may kick off another round of reforms which would help prevent this in the future. It won't stop it, but we do need to have some remedies.
But some may say, pointing to Governor George Ryan, Blagojevich was supposed to be the answer to the new leadership of Illinois. Do we have hope that there is new leadership that can go beyond having governors convicted?
Well, I think Pat Quinn, for instance, is an honest governor. I don't expect to have him selling the Senate seat or doing the similar kinds of things. Appointing people to boards, very important boards that give out millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts and then getting kickbacks as campaign funds. That's not his style. I don't think it will be for the near future. But it's not enough just to elect a few good people. We have to change the ground rules in Illinois. We're next door to places like Wisconsin and Minnesota, which are much cleaner, do not have governors going to jail on a regular basis. This is sort of 3 out of 5. That's a
not
pretty
good
high.
Average. Yeah.
Well, in my days in the city council, there have been 31 of my colleagues go to jail since 1970. That's an enormous number. There are only 50 aldermen. We've only had 150 since I served. You know, I say it's the most dangerous place to be would be in the state government or in the city council chamber. Much worse crime rate than the ghettos.
Do you think it was important to have a second trial, however it plays out today?
I think it's important that we see that there are substantive convictions, not just lying to the FBI and the federal government. Because I think, in truth, Blagojevich was guilty of substantive things. And I know the argument on the other side, well, he only talked a lot. No, he was involved in schemes to defraud the government in order to get money to fund his campaigns and what he hoped for would be the sort of Barack Obama campaign for presidency that he didn't get to run.
What about the defense's argument to the jury, basically saying he wasn't doing anything that any other politician hasn't done, that this is how business is done? And even, you know, some of the columnists in Chicago have talked about Madigan and Daley and things that they were able to get done in the city and maybe profited from. And why is it that he's basically the guy who got caught speeding, though everybody else was speeding right along with him?
Well, I've been a public official. Tom's currently a public official as trustee of a town. Not every politician in Illinois is stealing from the till. There are a large number of people who are doing very valorous public service, and that's what we want to encourage and to discourage the kind of behavior that's on trial here.
What charge are you going to be watching for most closely today when the verdict comes down?
Well, I think the colorful one is whether or not he was trying to sell the Senate seat. I think the obvious answer to that is he was. Whether it's sufficient in specifics to cause a guilty verdict is another matter that we'll have to wait to hear from the jury.
We have just found out that the prosecutors have arrived at the Dirksen Federal Building. Again, another step closer. U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald has arrived in the courtroom as well. So we are moments away from hearing a verdict.
Let's talk about the defense for just a second, Tom Glasgow. The show me the money was kind of the defense.
Yes.
Follow the money, and if you follow the money, nobody made any money. No money exchanged hands here. Do you think that was effective?
It was effective in the first trial. But I think the prosecution, when they ended up dropping those RICO counts and making it much less complicated, showed, and particularly during closing arguments, which they did a very effective job at, is that it was not the actual money transaction that was the crime. It was the planning that was the crime. And that really, really was the crux of the entire argument here. And they made a big deal of, he didn't profit, he didn't profit, he didn't profit. That was not the issue here. It was the planning. It was the fact that he was taking those steps towards the illegal action that really undermined the confidence in the public's confidence in government.
But one of the points that the prosecution made was that, like a policeman taking a bribe would be illegal, but then the defense turned on that and basically said, but politicians are required to take, or not required, but they can take money legally because they need to get reelected. So the defense countered that point by the prosecution.
But the issue was a quid pro quo. Was he getting something for that contribution? And I think Jesse Jackson's testimony was really relevant when he started talking about the money that he was exchanging for the Senate seat, with the potential to be appointed to the Senate seat. That was really powerful evidence, and I really don't know whether or not the jury really bought into this. It was just politics as usual. Ryan tried it. Other people have tried it. It just does not work as a defense because it isn't politics as usual.
We asked Professor Simpson what count he's looking for. What count are you particularly interested in as far as what the verdict will be?
All the counts that are related to the Senate seat. I think that is incredibly important. And if it does come back as a guilty verdict, then I think the jury has spoken for society, Illinois society, that this is wrong, and we're not going to put up
the other big, the huge difference between the first trial is Mr. Blagojevich testified for a long time. He answered every single question this time around. How important do you think that will be in whatever decision the jury came up with?
I think that's monumental. When the defendant hits the stand, that either is your case or is not your case. And when the defendant gets on there, either the jury believes him or don't believe him. And that was a huge risk that the defense took, but they had to take it. They had to take it in this situation because of the evidence that was not going to come in if he didn't testify.
And I do want to share from our tweet that we're getting from the 25th floor that Rod Blagojevich is shaking hands with members of the media as he is walking down the hall to the restroom. Maybe that's too much information. But he has not changed his style at all. As far as this trial, he's definitely still been the forever politician. Even with this jury, those who were in the courtroom talked about the fact that he was still trying to entertain them with his humor.
Before the first trial, I was dining at a local Thai restaurant in our neighborhood. I live very, very close to where Rod Blagojevich does. And he came in and was picking up food for the family to take back home. And he was trying to convince me I should really pay attention because, he would really be proven innocent. He was smoozing me. I've known him a long time, since before he ran for Congress. Back in actually when I ran for Congress, it was a very complicated situation. Knew his father-in-law, Dick Mell. But he was trying to convince me as if, this was just, a big mistake. Somehow he had been caught up in something that was really unfortunate, but it wasn't his fault. He was really the good guy. He was really trying to help the children and really trying to help the elderly and so forth. It seemed to me incredible. He actually believes the story. It's not just an act for the media, which some people can do. Everyone he sees that he knows, he tries to tell the same story. It's not a different story.
What is the difference between the Rod Blagojevich you see in person and speak with and the Rod Blagojevich you hear on all of those tapes?
The Machiavellian screwball approach that he has is quite different. This is no longer about the children, no longer about helping the elderly. This is about deals. Who will get the Senate seat, and can I get something golden for it? Can I get a payoff, either my way to the White House, a job in the federal administration, actual money transferring, help with Patty Blagojevich's real estate operation? He was very crass on the tape and very profane as well, which he is never in public or even talking in a normal conversation with people.
Thomas Glasgow, it's almost schizophrenic when you see him on the stand and you hear what he has to say, and then you listen to those tapes. Is that a problem for the jury when they see and hear two totally different people?
It played into Richard's argument that here's a person who will lie to you when it is appropriate to you. And one of the questions that he asked was, you lied to the public. You've lied to them. Yes, I have. That's politics. Well, you know, he's now got those tapes that juxtapose in contrast to the way that he was trying to schmooze the jury by telling jokes and trying to shake the prosecutor's hand and trying to make people laugh. This is the true Rod Blagojevich was the argument, and I think it's a very effective argument.
Some were questioning whether the retrial would get as much interest as the first trial. Marianne Ahern standing by in the Dirksen Federal Building. Marianne, let's talk a little bit about that, the differences between the first trial and this trial. Obviously, this trial gaining lots of nationwide, national, international attention. What do you think this trial can do as far as helping to clean up Illinois' reputation should we get a verdict here today of, as you were saying, on some of the substantial counts?
Well, we already had 2 or 3 pieces of state legislation passed. We now have a much better campaign finance law in the state than we've ever had before. We were the Wild West. Anybody could give any amount of any money to anybody. As long as they didn't do it in a sealed envelope and do it secretly
at a
quid pro quo, they were fine. You know, if Tom wanted to give me $2 million to run for governor or something, he's free to do that. There were no limitations. There are now limitations. There's now disclosure. We have increased the Public Information Act. Lisa Madigan passed a new series of public information, which means any citizen can get much more information. And the mayor of the city of Chicago has been on a major campaign about transparency. Part of that comes out of the Blagojevich era. That is, there's a demand now that we have more information about government, more information about politics, and that there are barriers to too many deals getting by simply because one person can, or one company or one labor union can write a gigantic check and no one will know it.
So you feel progress has definitely been made?
Well, it's limited. In our anti-corruption reports we've done from the University of Illinois, we've done now 4 of them. We calculate that at least 25 different things need to be done. One of them is changing our curriculum in the public schools so that we now teach what is corruption, what is the cost of corruption. We've even taken civics out of the curriculum in the public schools. So we no longer teach even about good government, about government itself, the mechanics, and we certainly don't teach about good government versus bad government and what the cost of corruption is, what the terrible things are. When we did the Burnham Plan in 1909 and Chicago embarked on a beautiful lakefront and the other physical changes, there was a manual written by Wacker, which Wacker Drive is named, and it took 30 years to get enough people to go through the education project in 8th grade. And then finally we got all of these beautiful changes. It's like that to end corruption. It's not a single silver bullet. It's not one election. It's not one public official. It's a series of changes and a long-term commitment.
Let's update the viewers for just a second. If you're just joining us, the jury has reached a verdict. They've reached agreement on 18 of the 20 counts against Rod Blagojevich. He and his wife have arrived at the 25th floor of the Dirksen Federal Building. The prosecution is in the courtroom. We are just waiting on the judge and the jury to come in and announce that verdict, and we are standing by waiting for that.
Now, we have waited 10 days for this jury as they deliberated. And what does that normally tell you, Tom? If a jury goes longer in their deliberation, is that usually favorable for the defense?
Usually it is favorable for the defense because they're taking the time to go through the evidence and piece through the evidence, not just walking out, signing the forms and saying, this guy's guilty. They really, really got serious about going through the evidence, piecing together, and going through the jury instructions, which are quite difficult to understand on the front end.
But you don't, in your heart, you don't think it's in favor of the defense today?
I don't. I really do think that they're going to come back with a guilty verdict with regard to the majority of these counts, and whether they come back on one or all, as I said before, he's going to be sentenced to most likely that 7 to 10 year range based on one of these 20-year counts.
And walk us through, once this verdict is read and we finally find out what the jury decided, after that, it's not, Blagojevich will not be taken away.
He's not swept off the floor.
He's not.
No, that is reserved for things where you have mandatory sentences, such as in drug cases, or where a person is already in incarceration. He's not a flight risk. The government didn't have detention in this matter, such that he couldn't not be in the MCC and he was out and, with everyone else. What will happen is they will go ahead and say, okay, we're going to set a sentencing date. Then everybody will go get post-trial motion dates. They'll end up filing sentencing briefs, and and then they'll come back for the sentencing, and once they give the sentencing, the judge will read the sentencing verdict, much like with Conrad Black recently, and you will see the defendant walk out as Conrad Black did, and they'll say you will report to such and such a federal facility, correctional facility on this date, and turn yourself in. Here's the order. Please make sure you
there
get
will be an appeal if there isn't a conviction, and he will ask to be out of court while pending appeal. Is the judge likely to grant that or not?
That's not something that the trial court would grant. That would be something that the Seventh Circuit would grant, an appeal bond. I don't see that in the cards for Mr. Blagojevich because you have to show a high likelihood of success. I don't think that's here in this matter.
Let's go back to the defense for a minute. The other defense, I mean, show me the money, and there wasn't any, was their defense. Plus, he was surrounded by lawyers. There were lawyers with him on the phone as chief of staff and other people in the room, and you don't hear anything on those tapes of, hey, wait a minute, you can't do this.
Yeah, what I found very interesting along those same lines is that when he testified, the defense rested, and the government did not present any other evidence to contradict him, which I thought was very, very interesting because they were trying to keep this case as streamlined as possible. You heard all those evidence. You heard the tapes. You heard what happened. You heard what happened on the front end. They put everything in on the front end of this case so that they did not have to worry about coming back and doing rebuttal and then giving the defense a chance for rebuttal and possibly getting the tape with Rahm Emanuel and other people into evidence somehow along those lines.
Marianne Ahern at the Dirksen Federal Building at this hour is telling us at any moment we will begin to hear what the jury decided. The verdict will be read in the courtroom. Again, we have Carol Marine, Phil Rogers inside the courtroom. When appropriate, they will be able to tweet us that information or text us that information. Marianne Ahern in the lobby of the Dirksen Federal Building will also be able to relay us reaction there. As well, as we all wait and wonder. We all got the phone call this morning
that
that
You're going to see the glasses coming on, and we're going to be looking at this screen in just a second because the tweets are going to be coming in here, and I can't read without
But
these.
we all got the call this morning that the jury had made a decision and that Judge Zagel, the prosecutors and defense were okay with the fact that they had reached an agreement on 18 of the 20 counts. 2 of the counts they are deadlocked on, and we will not have a verdict on those 2 counts. But we will be hearing what they decided on the other 18.
So when it starts, we will start to get these tweets. We will relay them to you and put graphics up, looking at earlier video of the former governor and his wife, Patty, arriving at the Dirksen Federal Building. They're up on the 25th floor now. As the verdicts come in, we will read them to you, and if we have time, explain what the counts are. The first 10 counts are all wire fraud counts. Wire fraud is essentially making a phone call across state lines to further one of these 5 alleged schemes. One of them dealing with the
Children's
sentencing,
Memorial
the
Hospital.
other with the Children's Memorial Hospital, which is actually the first charge. Yes. Then the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 10th are all about the Senate seat. The 9th one has to do with a gambling racetrack bill.
The 11th count was the shakedown, which had an association with Rahm Emanuel's district when he was congressman there. Also, the 12th count is attempted extortion related to Children's Memorial. I mean, these were some complicated, intertwined charges, and for the jury, I'm sure that was part of the reason, too, why they had to take so much time going through each and every one.
I agree. I mean, these are, as streamlined as this is still a complex case. And
they even provided them this time around with like a binder with tabs, and the closing arguments, I understand.
Jump in for 1 second here. The media has been let into the courtroom, which means this verdict is imminent. We're putting up the graphic here showing the 20 counts and breaking them down: 4 attempted extortion, 2 soliciting a bribe, 2 extortion conspiracy, 2 bribery conspiracy, and there'll be 10 wire fraud counts. There are the 5 schemes: the Senate shakedown, the racing industry shakedown, the Illinois tollway shakedown, the Children's Hospital shakedown, all of these the allegations in the case, and the school shakedown on the north side.
But to go back, when they finished up this case, they did give the jury a lot of information and pretty much drew the lines for them how to connect what was
It was a
given.
connect the dots book. I mean, you could follow along. We want you to follow along during the course of the closing argument. Here you go, take these back with you to the jury room, so make it much easier. They really didn't learn from that first jury trial.
They learned
Let's
a lot
make
from that first.
this simple.
Yeah, they learned a lot. They streamlined their case, and that is something that a lot of people are saying may also bring about, obviously, more juries, the jury being able to make a decision versus last time where they were only able to make an agreement on one of the counts against Mr. Blagojevich.
What do you make of the one question the jury asked, which had to do with the wire fraud counts? It was kind of a complicated question about the jury instructions regarding wire fraud. What did you make of that question?
What does he have to do to defraud someone, I believe, was the crux of the question. And what it tells me as an attorney is that that's one of the things that they were hung up on. Did he actually do something to defraud someone? Define that for us. Help us out, court. And the judge said, you need to learn to do this on your own. It's your decision. You're the judge and arbiter of the facts. That issue of did he defraud someone is going to be the crux of those wire counts. And did he take a substantial step using a manner of interstate commerce to perform that task? And that's really an issue, because did he defraud someone? Did he defraud the U.S. government? Did he defraud the people of the state of Illinois? Did he defraud campaign contributors? Did he defraud Children's Memorial Hospital? What is it that he did to defraud someone, I think, is the question that jury has to come up with.
And we're about to get an answer to all of those
Yes, we
questions.
are.
Marianne Ahern is back at the Dirksen Federal Building. Let's go back to Marianne. Verdict is imminent, we're told. All right, thanks, Marianne. Thomas Glasgow, what can we expect once this verdict is read? Will they poll the jurors one by one afterwards to see if they all agreed? Or how long do you think this process is going to take?
They can. That is the defense's right. You can ask that the jury be polled, which is essentially the judge asks each juror one by one, is this now and was this then your verdict? Yes, it is. And they go through each juror and ask them that. Will they do it? Yes, I think it's a matter of practice. If they've been found guilty of something, the prosecution doesn't have that right.
Why do you do it?
You do it to ensure that there's nobody that's been coerced, nobody that has, had the peer pressure brought upon them by the other members of the jury in that jury room. I signed it because I felt, these other guys were going to beat me up, or that they were browbeating me. That's essentially what you do. And now you're out in the open in front of the court, and the court does have a different effect on people when you're in front of a court and you're in front of the judge in open court as opposed to back in that jury room.
Does it make a difference that this is such a high-profile case with the future of the former governor of the state of Illinois on the line? Do you think it makes a difference to be a juror on this particular case?
I do. I think jurors, by and large, take their jury service seriously, whether it is the DUI case or whether it is the governor of the state of Illinois on trial. They really, in the classes that we've taught and having the camera hooked up back and watching the jurors deliberate, it is intriguing to watch the methodical way that they go through each and every aspect of the case. It is absolutely fascinating. So I don't think that they approach this any different than any other criminal jurors would, but it is a big deal, and they know it's a big deal.
Professor Simpson, if we can bring you into this conversation, you've known Rod Blagojevich for many, many years. Do you feel that it helped him that he went on the stand this time around, whereas last time he said he was going to, and then he didn't, and that left a lot of people feeling like he had not delivered on a promise?
Well, that strategy obviously worked the first trial, not to appear. I think this time he did need to appear in person and try and convince the jury that he was really innocent, and that sort of rolling the dice, you're taking some chances. Speaking about him as a person, he's going to be sentenced at least to that 5-year sentence or some portion of it, whatever he's convicted of today. Jim Lasky and the other people who've gone off to federal prison have quite a tale to tell as to what it's like for a public official, a George Ryan or someone like that, to go to prison. And it is not a comfortable experience. I mean, we talk about it sometimes as if it were a country club. It is not. You're there with prisoners. You're very confined. It's very different from what you've known for already. Rod Blagojevich is not called Mr. Governor or Honorable or any of the kinds of titles that he used to have. He doesn't get the adulation, even though there are a few people around his house and a few people at the federal building. He's already lost a great deal, and he's going to lose a great
who are
more.
Obviously going to be growing up while he's in
going to
prison,
miss
which is
some key years of his children as they move through the teen years.
And one way or the other, he will probably go to prison because he was convicted of the earlier charge, even if he's acquitted today.
Even if he were completely acquitted, he'd probably get the 5 years.
From what you know about his personality, do you think he is any more or less equipped to deal with the potential of life behind bars than some of the other politicians who face that?
I think a lot of the other politicians have been much more disciplined and have had a stronger center core of character that made it somewhat easier. It was never easy. If you look at a Dan Walker, how gaunt he is today in comparison to when he was governor, this is a trying experience for anybody. And, it is a major punishment. It is something that you never escape. You will always be a convicted felon.
And what will that do to, what is the status of his law license now? I should probably know that, but I don't. Do you know?
I'll let Tom take that one.
Upon a conviction in the federal court, the judge will then order a report to be sent to the ARDC, or Attorney Registration Disciplinary Committee. And upon a conviction, the ARDC will take action to either suspend or revoke the license of a practicing attorney when that occurs. He's not the first attorney to be sentenced in federal court, and that's the procedure that they go through.
And we want to catch everybody up. If you're just joining us, breaking news today, the jury in the Rod Blagojevich retrial has reached a verdict on 18 of the 20 counts. In just moments, we are waiting word of what the jury has decided. Again, we have people inside the courtroom, Carol Marine, Phil Rogers, Marianne Ahern's in the lobby. We are waiting to hear from their tweets. I keep looking at my computer screen, hoping to see something as it gets harder and harder to wait, which I'm sure for those who are in, like Mr. Blagojevich, it's even more difficult because it's their fate, it's their life.
You can truly cut the tension with a knife when you're sitting there waiting for that verdict to come back. You're waiting for that door in the back behind the judge to open up. You're waiting for the jurors to file out. You're sitting there waiting. The judge isn't even on the bench.
And that's you as an attorney. Imagine Rod Blagojevich at this moment and his wife with his whole life's on the line right now.
Absolutely, and I've had clients and their families sitting behind me where that is happening, and we did that at the beginning of this month in the jury trial that I was telling you about that we had. And the people are just stoic. They can't say anything.
Let's go back to the videotape of Rod Blagojevich and Patty leaving their Ravenswood home earlier this afternoon when they got word of the verdict, and they're on the way to the courthouse. And hear what he had to say. Obviously, there's a lot going on behind those eyes, but you didn't really see it. Let's take a listen.
Look, it's in God's hands, and you know, my hands are shaky, my knees are weak. I can't seem to stand on my own 2 feet, and I'm praying and certainly hope for the best. What do you think about
even doing a little rhyme apparently for everyone there, but obviously for real that he is nervous about what is about to come, because this is the retrial. The first trial obviously ended with a deadlock on all but one count. And Sam Adam and Sam Adam Jr., his two attorneys at that time, felt very victorious in that outcome. This outcome, different team defending him this time around. Aaron Goldstein did the closing arguments in this trial. It'll be interesting to see how their approach to defending Blagojevich turns out.
Yeah, and whether or not putting him on the stand was the right thing to do. I think you thought there was no other option really this time because you didn't the first time, and you have to put somebody out there and directly answer every single question.
We're getting a tweet here. The media has been let in, or we already had that. 3 of the alternate Blagojevich jurors are in the court for the verdict. So they brought the 3 alternate jurors in. Here I thought we were going to get
So how close do you think we are right now, knowing that fact?
Knowing that the alternates have been brought in, we're mere minutes away. I mean, the alternates have been brought in so that they can partake in this, so that they can then get the thanks of the judge and get their certificate for jury service as well. They were part of the group. They sat through and listened to all this. This is their case as well.
And as a prosecutor, is it protocol then after they read the verdict at some point to sit down with the jury, or does that come days later?
That's really at the discretion of the judge as to whether or not he will allow, or he or she will allow you to talk with the jury. You can ask permission. That some judges will allow it, some judges don't. Some jurors don't want to talk to you. They just want to go home. This is a very, very trying experience.
I'm amazed over the years, though, and Allison too, I'm sure, about how many jurors do want to talk. They want to explain how they arrived at these decisions. Not all of them, but a lot of them do, and in the first case, many of them did.
Right, and speaking with some of the jurors from the first case, I was amazed to hear what they had to say and their reflections on what went on in that jury room and how they came to the decisions that they came to. I thought it was fascinating that the age differences in the first jury and the makeup of that first jury really did affect the outcome of the jury.
We had some very young jurors
Right.
and a few older jurors on that particular jury.
And the socioeconomic background of each one of the jurors did have an effect and played in on what they thought of the governor and how he reacted.
We are now getting a tweet. The courtroom is silent as we wait for Judge Zagel and the jury of 11 women and 1 male to enter into the courtroom. So now we are just moments away.
We believe that the first verdict to be read, unless this is the one they couldn't agree on, will be a wire fraud count related to Children's Memorial Hospital, specifically in connection to a phone call on October 17th, 2008, with CEO Pat Magoon at the hospital. That is a felony count that carries a maximum penalty of 20 years and $250,000 fine.
And I think it was particularly egregious because essentially what you were doing was withholding funds to a hospital that takes care of sick children to get a campaign contribution. I don't know how the jury will decide the case, but I think to the public that is as bad as trying to sell the U.S. Senate seat.
Do the federal prosecutors have that right to determine which count comes first, second, third, fourth, or how is that determined?
That's how you charge it in front of the grand jury. You select which charges are going to go in which order.
Is there a strategy to that?
Absolutely, and I think that Mr. Simpson absolutely hit the nail on the head, and that you want to put the most egregious charge first. That's why you always have a murder charge first on a murder case. That's why you have an outrageous charge like this. You're keeping funds from sick children.
Courtroom is silent as they wait for Judge Zagel and one man to enter. So we're waiting for the verdict to come in. It is going to be tweeted to us as soon as they start. So paint this picture. We're not there, and we can't see in there, but what are the people inside the courtroom seeing right now, do you think?
Right now, you're sitting there waiting, and there is complete silence in the courtroom. Your fight or flight instinct is kicking in, and your adrenaline is rushing. Most of the people who are either, sitting at the tables, the prosecution or defense tables, their heads are rushing because they've got so much adrenaline in them at that time, and they are just waiting for that person to walk through the door and begin to decide the fate of the individual who's sitting next to you.
And we're just getting word that the jury has definitely entered into the courtroom, so the jury obviously taking their seats, as well as Judge Zagel. And we, again, are just waiting, like everyone, to hear what they have to say in these tense moments just before the verdict is read in the second trial of Rod Blagojevich. And the video you're watching is from him earlier this afternoon as he entered the Dirksen Federal Building, going through security as he has so many times during this trial. And again, not missing a beat as far as taking a moment, and you'll see in just a few seconds here, to shake the hand of maybe one of the security staff.
Count one, guilty. Count
we got
number
it in?
one is guilty. That just came in 5 seconds ago. We believe that is a wire fraud count dealing with Children's Memorial Hospital.
And he's also guilty on count number 2, which would be wire fraud related to the U.S. Senate seat. So count 1, guilty. Count 2, guilty of wire fraud related to the U.S. Senate seat.
And each of these is a maximum of 20 years. He won't get 20 years, as you've already talked about, but as you begin to add them up, it means a longer sentence. These are going to be substantial. They wouldn't have acquitted, you wouldn't have found guilty on 2 counts without finding some others.
And that is the count. Count 2, that is the first one dealing with the Senate seat. That is the count in the scheme that the prosecution was most concerned about.
And that's the one that Pete Fitzgerald talked about, when Peter Fitzgerald talked about the fact that Lincoln would roll over in his grave seeing this happen. This was the impetus for them moving quickly, was the Senate seat. So this
different
is a big
jury,
victory.
obviously different outcome, and obviously a different case presented to them, a more streamlined case, as we've been talking about. So again, we have 2 guilties at this point, count 1 and count 2. We are waiting to hear. We have 20 counts against the former governor. Now we're going back. Okay, that's count 1.
Count 1 wire fraud, which we believe has to do with Children's Memorial Hospital. Inside the courtroom where we don't have a view, I'm assuming, as you look forward, Judge Zagel is in the middle. Have you been in this courtroom?
That's correct. Yes, this is a ceremonial courtroom.
And the jury is on the left or the right-hand side?
And the jury, I believe, is on the right-hand side as you're looking at Judge. I'm sorry, on the left-hand side as you look at Judge Zagel.
We have more. Guilty on count 3. Guilty on count 4.
Both Senate seat wire fraud counts.
Counts 4 through 10. Guilty on count 12. So we are hearing from this jury that they did not buy the governor's version of things on the witness stand. He has been found guilty of counts 1 through 10.
Most of which have
count
to do with the
12.
Senate seat, and count 12, 13, and 14. 12 is attempted extortion regarding Children's Memorial Hospital. 13 is soliciting a bribe related to Children's Memorial Hospital. 14 is extortion conspiracy related to a racing bill, a gambling bill. Most of these are 20-year felonies. The soliciting a bribe, count 13, is a 10-year felony.
Now, when people at home are hearing this information, knowing that these counts, especially the wire fraud counts, maximum 20 years, 20 years attempted extortion for count 11, 20 years for count 12. This is not something, though, that the governor is going to face hundreds of years in prison, you're saying,
No.
Tom Glasgow. This is something that he'll serve concurrently, most likely?
That's correct. He most likely will serve a concurrent sentence of anywhere between 7.5 to 12 years.
Count 17, not guilty. That is one of the counts.
Count 17, soliciting a bribe. That was the tollway shakedown.
So there were a couple of charges
that is
related to
not
the
guilty.
tollway, so perhaps those are the ones.
And
But
have
count
we
17,
seen
not
count,
guilty.
The one count I just want to clarify, count number 11, at this point, the school shakedown, we had talked about this earlier. I do not see a verdict on count 11. So 11 they must have skipped over. Maybe that was the count
one of
that
the
they
ones
had
where
a
they
difficult time
probably didn't agree on, and it's
reaching a
probably
verdict.
It could be.
And that was the one we had talked about maybe being a more difficult one to...
That's correct, but I would wonder whether or not this the other extortion count with regard to the tollway would be the other one that they were hung up on for the issue. And I don't know. It sounds as if they didn't believe that he solicited a bribe for the tollway shakedown, but
Yeah, 15 we have not heard yet. So that would be the racing bill, and 16 was the tollway. So 15 and 16 we have not heard on, or count number 11, which is the school shakedown.
The counts 18, 19, and 20 are again dealing with a Senate seat.
So basically what you have is they've convicted
No
him.
verdict on 11 and 16.
no
So
verdict.
16 was the tollway
Okay.
issue, in which he had a meeting with Gerald Krozel and Blagojevich's direction of Lon Monk to get money from Krozel.
so the attempted extortion was what they ended up having the problems with.
All right, count 19, guilty. Count 18, guilty. Count 16, guilty. Now they're saying guilty.
I'm saying correction, no verdict on count 16 is what
No.
I have here.
Well, I have a, wait a minute. I have a
You may
guilty.
have it more up to date.
Okay.
I
I
have
have
no
guilty
verdict
on
on
16, not guilty on 17.
Okay.
Yeah. And still have not heard on 11. So let's just go through this. We have a guilty on count 1, 2 through 8, 10, guilty on 9, guilty on 12, guilty on 13, 14, guilty on 15, guilty on 16, 18, 19. And so now we are just waiting for, for 20,
I
which
would
was
predict that would be a
related to the
guilty.
U.S. Senate seat as well.
And I mean, and the headline is, when it came to the Senate seat charges today, it looks like guilty on just about all of them, if not all of them, and most of them are 20-year felonies. It was the crux of Patrick Fitzgerald's case. He said he had to stop a crime spree and stop this crime before someone was appointed to the Senate.
Correct. And you know what? The fact that they ended up finding him guilty of these is something that I think is very important for the government. This is a great win for the government, but I really think that it had to do, for the most part, with regard to the fact that he testified. And the fact that he testified, when you have a case and a person doesn't testify, then generally the jury will weigh the government's case by itself and determine whether or not there's enough evidence to convict. But when a person gets on the stand and testifies, as Blagojevich did, and he gave some unreasonable answers to questions that were posed by Reachar.
No reaction to the guilty verdicts from Blagojevich. That's what we're getting from inside the courtroom. No verdict again on count 11, and it is guilty on count number 20. So we have two hung counts, or where they could not reach a decision. That was count 11 and count 16. Is that correct?
Yes,
no,
that's
17.
correct.
I have
Count
16,
No, it's-
not guilty
it's
on
16.
17.
Marianne Ahern is at the Dirksen Federal Building in the lobby right now. We still have reporters in the courtroom. Let's go to Marianne right now for reaction. Marianne?
So, Robin Allison,
keep
we're standing by right now for Rod Blagojevich, who we expect is at least going to come to the first floor, and then we'll see whether he wants to speak.
All right, keep us posted. We'll get right back to you as that happens. We've been watching along with everyone else as this unfolds, getting reaction. And if we can bring you in, Tom Glasgow, talking about what Professor Kling had talked about, Rob Blagojevich taking this witness stand, that was not a defensive tactic, was it? The defense
In my
team?
opinion, no. I mean, you have to sit down. Your client is the one who decides whether or not he's going to testify or not testify. And that's something that the judge has to admonish him if he chooses not to testify, as to he has the right to testify and explain to the jury. In my experience in both prosecution and defense, when you put a defendant on, they're going to weigh the prosecution's evidence versus the defendant's testimony and his version of the events. When you end up with just having the defendant sit there, they're going to weigh the prosecution's evidence to see whether or not there's enough to convict. And that's a real big difference between the first case and the second case. And as Rob and I were talking about, Blagojevich has taken a tactic since the beginning of his impeachment that he's going to testify without testifying. He got out there, he came to the closing arguments and told everybody what he wanted to tell them. But he didn't submit himself to cross-examination then. He went on all the reality shows and told everybody what he wanted to do and what he did.
So he controlled the message. He
controlled the issue, which was a very, very smart tactic. The minute he got on the stand, and Reed Shar was the one who controlled what was being answered, and and Judge Zagel was the one who told him, you are not going to just go off on whatever tangent you want, give the message that you want. You're going to answer the questions of the prosecutor, and you're going to tell this jury exactly what the question is. That changed the tenor of this entire case.
And as legal expert, you think that is probably the turning point in this case?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Let's bring in Teresa Zagnoli for a second here. You're a jury consultant and expert on this. What are the questions you have for this jury?
Well, I'd like to know the moment that they started to lean this direction, because I believe that they all started the first day of court doing what the judge told them to do, and that is to come with an open mind and to come as unbiased as you possibly can based on your own experiences in life. So when did the needle start to move over? I doubt that it was Blagojevich's testimony, but I'm certain that pushed them for the ones who were already leaning. You can't sit on a stand for 7 days and defend yourself. It's almost virtually impossible to do.
But does the jury give a defendant credit for being willing to sit on that stand for 7 days and take every single question from the prosecutor and answer?
No, not at all. All the jurors in any kind of case come to the courtroom believing that they're there because you all couldn't settle this yourselves. And so they're there watching and listening, and they expect everybody to be willing to testify and happy to testify. And it doesn't matter whether you're the defendant or whether you're a prosecutor witness or an expert in a case. They're there because you put them there, and they want you to be willing to tell your story, but not 7 days worth.
And John Cass also talked about in one of his columns about how all it takes is one juror, and he had sat on a jury and was, he says, able to turn them one way and the other. Do you think that in this particular case, it'll be interesting to find out, were there those who were able to then bring everyone along, or was this a jury that had its own mind made up when they came into the room, other than on the accounts that they were hung?
I am doubtful that one person had the strength to bring all of these people. Now, there may have been a minority of the group that had not yet decided, or they needed to hear you tell it. You tell me the story, as opposed to having heard it in the courtroom. They need it brought back to them. They may not have good memories. They may not have been paying attention at certain points. They may have been a little fuzzy on certain facts. And so that's what deliberations is all about. That's when you trade information to make sure that everybody's making a good decision.
You want to know what piece of evidence this jury hung its verdict on.
I do.
What piece of evidence do you think it would be with what you know about juries and what they listen to and what they don't listen to?
Well, I believe it was some inconsistency, because that's what jurors look for. That's what we all look for in finding truth, is that we look for an inconsistency in what you're saying and your body language when you're saying it, or two pieces of evidence that didn't quite go together. So if the story, if there's smoke, there's fire. If it smells a little fishy, there's something wrong. And that's how we make judgments about people. And I'm betting that there is something that they heard, and when they heard that piece of the puzzle didn't fit. And that's when they started to say, no, this isn't right.
Now, we've heard that Rob Blagojevich has left the witness room on the 25th floor of the Dirksen Federal Building. He's making his way down to the lobby. We're going to go right back to the lobby as soon as he gets here. But, Tom, if you can talk a little bit about your reaction when you heard this verdict come in. I know we were busy reading counts as they were coming along, but were surprised by it or not?
No, not at all. And as we talked about before the broadcast today, I truly thought that they were going to come back guilty with regard to most of the counts because of the streamlined issues in this case. And Blagojevich's testimony. And I agree, the toll-away portion was the weakest portion of this case. And it is very difficult for laymen to understand, much like the RICO counts before. But go back to what we were talking about with regard to the first trial. There was one holdout. There was one holdout on several of those counts. And by not having him testify, that may have been the situation here. Now, I don't know because we haven't talked to the jury, but that sometimes can be the swaying factor as to whether or not, I'm not focusing so much on the government's testimony, but what is he talking about? I didn't believe the explanations he came up with. I didn't believe the fact that he was redefining words when he got on the stand or being testy with the prosecutor at times. I didn't like that.
The inconsistency, what Teresa was talking about, between what's on the tape and what's said on the stand. And obviously, when Rod Blagojevich is on the stand, he has a vested interest because if he is found guilty, as he was on 17 counts, he's going to prison. On the tape, you would argue, I assume, to the jury that here he didn't know people were listening. So he had no reason to be lying then.
And correct. And you don't have the chance to judge the demeanor of a defendant when he sits there at counsel table with his counsel. And when he gets on the stand, immediately he opens his mouth. You get the judge's demeanor.
For our viewers' sake, we have a live camera at the Dirksen Federal Building right now. We are awaiting the governor to come around that corner as he has done on so many days. But this time, he is coming down with knowing that he has been convicted on 17 of 20 counts.
He showed no discernible emotion other than telling his wife that he loved her. She was emotional, according to Carol Maureen, who was in the courtroom at the time. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of emotion going through a guy who is a very emotional guy. So it'll be very interesting to hear what he has to say. Any predictions? What do you think Rod Blagojevich will say when he comes to these microphones?
I think he is definitely going to have his say. This is a person who hasn't been able to not say anything since the onset of this, and now he gets to say something without being cross-examined or told what to say. He's still a politician. The fact that he's been convicted does not take away his personality, and he is going to go out there and he's going to testify. We're
being told Rod Blagojevich is now on the first floor waiting to face the cameras. As we've watched this afternoon, the media has gathered. He seems like a moth to a flame, drawn to the media, and at this moment, as we were just saying, it's not likely he's not going to have anything to say.
Well, he's had a long
have a
time
lot
to think about it. He's had a long time to think about it. And
the sad part about this is that we are really our own worst judge of what other people's perception of us, and he is so off the mark and has been all along as to whether or not he thinks he can charm his way out of this just by the sheer force of his personality, and it failed publicly and it failed in trial.
He is a tremendously charming guy, though, from having dealt with him over the years. The trouble was the tapes. He's not charming on the tapes. Those tapes are brutal when you listen to them. And he himself said he's embarrassed by what he said. And he sounded like a jerk, I think is what he said. And it would be hard to argue that when you listen to those tapes. So that's was a huge problem for him.
And let's talk a little bit, too. He will not be taken into custody, obviously. He's being released on his own recognizance. And what happens next?
What will happen is the judge has ordered a pretrial investigation, pre-sentence investigation, excuse me, and it'll take anywhere between 3 months to 4 months to complete. And when they come back and they do sentencing then that is the time that he will be given his formal sentence.
And they did impose travel restrictions. Is that something that's normally done?
That's normal. I mean, generally, when a person is put on bond in federal court over in the Northern District of Illinois, you're not to leave the Northern District of Illinois. You can't leave the jurisdiction, and you have to get permission of the court in order to do that. And you sometimes have to surrender your passport, etc. That's fairly normal for the judge to do that. Now, how restrictive his travel restrictions are, just to stay in his house, his neighborhood, not to leave the city of Chicago, I don't know. But travel restrictions in the jurisdictional boundaries of the Northern District of Illinois are common.
I'm not sure. The prosecution wants a sentencing date as soon as possible. I'm not sure if they came up with a specific one. You were saying before, and you thought 45 days or so. The judge will weigh mitigators and aggravators in terms of looking at that sentence. What are the mitigators for deviating below, the 120 years he could possibly get?
Well, they're not going to be able to do it in 45 days, just because it's going to take 90 days in order to get that pretrial or pre-sentence investigation done. But when he comes back, the mitigating factors are education, lack of criminal history, the fact that he hasn't missed any court or hasn't had any issues or brushes with the law in the past, his family, his connections to society, what he has done, the good things. And prior to the sentencing guidelines, we used to put together big packets to give to the judge.
We're being told that he's exited the elevator and he has waved to everyone as he was going into the elevator, so we assume he will be in the lobby momentarily, and we will bring it to you live as he addresses the media after being convicted on 17 of 20 counts by this jury in the retrial of Rod Blagojevich. And looking at sentencing, you're saying that's going to take a while, and he will most likely appeal this conviction, but his chances of staying out of prison during that appeal, not very likely?
That it is not very good. I mean, you have to show good cause to the appellate court, to the Seventh Circuit. The Seventh Circuit then would have to grant the appellate bond. It's most likely not going to happen.
In terms of the appeal, and clearly he will appeal, the defense team, Rod Blagojevich's attorneys, are going to argue that Judge Zagel, their argument is...
here he comes.
Let's Rod Blagojevich on his way to the microphone with his wife. He's taken a moment to compose himself, and we're going to hear what he has to say as he and his wife, Patty, face a much different future. 17 convictions on corruption charges today. He's been in this situation before, last summer, convicted on one count, much different this time, because that charge was not nearly as serious this time. 17 convictions.
Well, among the many lessons that I've learned from this whole experience is to try to speak a little bit less. So I'm going to keep my remarks kind of short. Patty and I obviously are very disappointed in the outcome. I frankly am stunned. There's not much left to say other than we want to get home to our little girls and talk to them and explain things to them and then try to sort things out. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you guys again.
Governor, did you get a fair trial?
That's it. Why do you say seeing again?
Characteristic move by the former governor, not speaking at length, not going back and forth with the media, says he has learned a lesson, speaking less, and that he is stunned. And obviously his face, I think, says it all.
He looked stunned. He looked absolutely stunned. That's a Rod Blagojevich we have never seen before. Much different from a year ago on the one conviction on the less serious charge. But he looked pale, I'd say ashen. And he was stunned, because you look at what's ahead of him now, and he's got to go home and talk to his children, I'm assuming, and explain all of this.
He said he has to sort some things out. What are some of the things that he will be, I'm sure, talking to his defense team about?
Well, first he's going to try and determine what, if any, motion for new trial he's going to get, what errors were made during the course of the trial. And he's going to sit down and speak with his attorneys about what errors the trial court made in, sustaining objections or overruling objections, or evidence that was entered or not entered. Those are things that he needs to sort through with them. Additionally, he's going to have to do...
I'm just going to break in for a second. He's taken a moment again to talk to the crowd as despite what he just said to us at the microphones, he took a moment to stop and talk with someone.
And to shake some hands. And they're on their way home. We do have cameras that will bring you the reception he gets in Ravenswood Manor, where his home is. I know last time there were lots of people there to greet them and to embrace him as they came home. Of course, that trial, a much different outcome than this one. Much different.
And the realization of the fact that they've been convicted is something that is absolutely crushing to most defendants, because they go through this course of trial and they believe and they believe and they trick themselves into believing that what they're saying is true. No matter how outlandish the explanation is or how many lies that they've told, sometimes they actually believe that this is the truth and they're going to be set free. And when it does come down, it is an absolutely sobering mentality for them to say, wait a minute, somebody is telling me that I'm wrong. Somebody is telling me that what I did was not right. This can't be the outcome that I expected. And it is an absolutely crushing emotional and mental aspect for clients when they go into that situation.
Because earlier today we did hear from a Blagojevich spokesperson, and they were very optimistic. They said the spokesperson had claimed that the Blagojeviches were hopeful, nervous, anxious, and if he's not guilty, there was going to be one heck of a party. Tonight, no party.
Well, he's been now publicly humiliated in a way that he can't get out of it. There's nowhere for him to go at this point.
We're looking at the motorcade here, much as they're leaving the Dirksen Federal Building. I noticed, still characteristic of the former governor, he leaned over to the police officer who was waiting near the motorcade, seemed to thank the officer. The officer nodded, and then they're on their way. We're assuming back home. We don't know that for sure. Looking at the possibility of an appeal, Thomas Glasgow, if you were his attorney, on what grounds would you appeal?
The first thing that I would appeal is to take into account Judge Zagel's handling of the trial. And I don't mean to be critical of Judge Zagel, but with regard to the number of objections that were sustained during the course of this, it's got to be a basis for them.
We're going to stop for just a second. Marianne Ahern standing by at the courthouse. Marianne?
Allison, we wanted to bring up as well the political reality.